The day.
What's up, guys? I got an awesome hand of the day for you today from Laguna Beach, California. This one comes from Steven, who's playing a 5-10 cash game in Ontario, Canada. Finds himself in the small blind with a bunch of limpers. I think there's like 3 limpers in this hand. He completes in the small blind with ace-6 offsuit. Normally a dangerous hand, worse position, but a lot of fish in the pot, and the big blind is very tight, never raises. So I'm okay with completing here if you're sure you're gonna see the flop. Totally fine, and we go 5 ways to the flop. Flop comes 9-7-3 rainbow. So you're wondering how the hell did we get involved in this hand? Gets better. Checks, checks, under the gun limper checks. Mid position, the second limper bets 15 into 50, so very small bet. Folds around to us, and Steven, my man, I love you here, but he goes on to say something like, he puts the guy on a 9, a weak 9, and then he calls. So he goes on to give me some logic, which I'm kind of blasting the kid. His logic's not bad, but I gotta throw it in here. Look, you got 2 people behind you, right? You got the big blind behind you, who I understand is tight, but you got the under the gun limper, who could still be checking a strong hand or whatever. You got 2 people behind you, so if you call, you gotta expect that they're gonna call with anything getting like 27 to 1 on the flop. They're calling 15 to win 70. They're gonna call with a lot of hands. So not only do you have the potential of going 3 ways to the flop when you decide to call here, but you don't beat a weak 9. And even though you don't beat a weak 9, and even though it's a weak hand, I get it, you gotta ask yourself, how are you gonna get your opponent, who's probably like you said, he's a loose, like bad player who limped in, how are you gonna get him to fold a 9? Like, you're just gonna bet the turn, or check raise the turn and hope he bets, which he might not do, or the turn goes check check and then you just jam the river, or bet huge on the river? Like, it's still hard to get him to fold a 9 with the line that you take. So my first preference would be to fold, because you don't have anything and you don't have any draws, and I think you have a lot better hands that you can continue with. Like, you can continue with like 10-8 here and, you know, use that as a bluffing hand, or Jack 10 or something like that, I'm fine. But ace-6 is like a pretty bad hand with no backdoors. You don't even have a backdoor flush draw. So I would just fold this hand. If I'm going to play the hand because I think my opponent's weak, you gotta come in with a raise right now, man. You gotta come in, you're in the small blind, you could rep, you know, 2 pair, you could rep a set. Even though you're repping a small range of hands, you gotta come in with a raise and just hope that your opponent folds a 7 or a small pair or a draw. So I would come in with a raise if I'm gonna play. That's option number 2. And option number 3, my least favorite option, and I'm sorry to be hard on you, but it's people that are hard on you that make you better. So I love you, buddy. I'm trying to be hard on you because I'm trying to help you grow. My last favorite choice, the worst option, let's be honest, is to call. So you end up calling, it happens, I get it, I make mistakes too, don't worry about it. You call, thankfully the other 2 guys fold, and you're kind of lucky here to go heads up to the turn. Turn comes the king of clubs. We check, our opponent bets 55, and Steven writes into me and says, I'm suspicious about the bet size. I've never seen my opponent bet this big before, and I considered raising, but then I thought my opponent would play perfectly, so I opted to call. So I gotta question your logic here again. My first choice would be to fold. My second choice would be to raise, because it's not because I love raising, but it's because calling is so far behind raising that it makes raising a better choice. I hope that makes sense. I don't love raising, but I hate calling so much that I like raising more. Raising, at least, you know, your opponent might have a 9 and now he might fold it. It's really unlikely he has a king. You could still be repping like a strong hand that you check called the flop with. You could have kings up on the turn, you could have a set. Raising, actually, now that I'm talking about it, isn't actually that bad. And given that this is one of the worst hands you could have, I guess raising is okay. But calling is off limits here. Like, you're basically hoping that your opponent has Jack 10 and that he doesn't improve by hitting an 8, a queen, a jack, or a 10 on the river, and that he doesn't bluff you, because there's some rivers that he might bluff you off the best hand and you're just gonna have to fold. So, like, there's really not that much going for you. I don't know what you're really hoping to accomplish by calling. I don't really know how you can win the pot. So your opponent bet the flop into 5 people, now he's betting the turn. I guess you beat like 8-6, and maybe you're gonna check call the river if it's like the board pairs. But I just think that's so ambitious, and you have so many better hands that you can call the turn with. You can call the turn with any 9, or any 2-pair, or any set, or even any 7. I mean, Jesus, you could call the turn with so many better hands that you could completely let this one go and not worry about getting exploited. But I get it, he bet small, you think you're ahead. You called, we gotta play the hand that's played. So we call, let's go heads up to the river and see what happens. River comes an offsuit 5. So completing 6-4 and 8-6. So 2 of the straights got there. We check, our opponent bets 105, and now we decide to check raise all in for 305. So in this spot, you're basically saying that you have a straight, a set, or maybe king 9 or something like that. It's really hard for you to have a set because it's unlikely that you're gonna check the flop, then just check call with 2 people behind you, and then check the turn, and then just check call. So for you to have a set on the river, it means you would have to have played your set that way pre-flop by not raising, checking the flop, check calling the flop, checking the turn, and check calling the turn, and then checking the river. I think that's pretty unlikely, and if you don't play your set that way on even any one of those streets, it means you can't have a set on the river. So by using this process, which I call a hand range funnel, which I talk a lot more about in my book, The 4 Steps to Beating Anyone in Poker, you can see how you could eliminate a lot of hands from either your range or your opponent's range. So I think if we go through the hands that you can have, it's really unlikely you have a set, right? It's also unlikely you have a straight, because you probably wouldn't have, check called the flop and check called the turn with 8-6 out of position with 1 card to go, or 6-4. So it's really, really unlikely you have a straight. And because of that, it's really unlikely that you're going to check raise the river with 2 pair, because your opponent could have a set and your opponent could have a straight. So for you to check raise the river with 2 pair would almost be too loose. Like, I don't really see you having 2 pair, and the only 2 pair you could have is king 9 that would check raise. So it's pretty damn unlikely you have a hand here for value. And I think it almost screams a bluff. It almost looks like you're turning like a 7 with a flush draw into a bluff, like 7-6 of clubs or something like that. So it kind of looks like a bluff, and I don't really love bluffing in this spot because it looks like a bluff, and because your opponent repped a ton of strength, right? Like, it's unlikely that he's bluffing unless he has something specifically like Jack 10, I guess, or 10-8. And there's a lot of hands that he could have. I mean, he could have sets, he could have 2 pairs, he could have a straight. And I think all those hands are gonna call in the small stakes cash game against when he's a fish. He's not gonna fold those hands. So I think it's too aggressive to bluff here. I understand this is the worst hand you could have. From a game theory standpoint, you gotta pick some bluffs, you block a straight, all those things. But I think when you look at the analysis of it, I just think you're getting picked off here too often. And I think if your opponent's value betting at all, he's not gonna fold. So if your opponent has a king or better, which he's probably gonna value bet, I think he's just gonna call here. I would call here because I'd be like, this doesn't really make sense. It kind of looks like a hand turned into a bluff, and I call. So your opponent tanks for a while, tanks for 5 to 7 minutes, and he ends up calling with 2 4s, which I don't like. I think that's way too loose. I think some of your bluffs actually beat 2 4s. Like I said, if you have like 7-6 or 7-8 or something like that, or you're turning a 9 into a bluff, whatever, 2 4s doesn't beat that. So 2 4s loses to some of your bluffs, so I would fold that. But I still think this goes to show that your opponent basically, if he's not folding 2 4s, which is the absolute worst hand he can have, he's not folding ever. So I think your bluff's not getting through often enough, and you should probably just pitch this one in. So I hope you enjoyed this hand of the day. If you like how I broke this hand down and you want more that I don't have time to share here in these YouTube videos, check out my products, alectorelli.com/products, especially my workbook, The 4 Steps to Beating Anyone in Poker. It's really gonna help for analyzing your hand range, breaking down your opponent's hand, and then how to use this strategy to implement it in your own game to win more money and move up in stakes. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to my channel, putting out a lot more new content soon, and I'll see you guys next time on the hand of the day. Cheers.